Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Durejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to today's webinar on construction site disruptions. Today's webinar is hosted in partnership with Construction Alliance South Africa, or CASA, and is sponsored by MDA Attorneys, the construction law specialists. We thank them for making this event possible. Before we begin, please be aware that we have enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many of your questions as possible throughout the session. To encourage interaction, we have also enabled the chat function. You'll find this at the bottom of your screen. Please do not post any questions in the chat box, however, as the panelists may miss them. Post them into the Q&A. Please be aware that we are recording this webinar and will be sending the recording to you after the session. We are also streaming the webinar live to YouTube and will share the link in the chat shortly. Today's webinar will be emceed by Bernadette Eksteen. Bernadette is a registered professional landscape architect with more than 25 years of experience in the field of landscape architectural consulting and related matters. She is also the administrator for the South African Green Industries Council, or SAGIC, where she manages the day-to-day operations of the organization. Apart from running her practice, Bernadette manages and participates in the processes associated with the development of qualifications within the green industry by drafting guidelines, participating at forums and stakeholder engagement platforms relevant to the green industry, such as hydro zones, water restrictions, and alien vegetation, among others. I'll hand over to Bernadette now, who will take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Bernadette.
Thank you, Shannon, for the introduction. Once again, welcome to the CASA webinar today. A very special welcome to the Honourable Minister Zikalala, the Minister of the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, our CASA chairperson, Mr. John Matthews, panelists, and of course, you, the webinar attendees. We trust that it will be an informative and interactive session this afternoon. So just a bit of background first regarding CASA, for those of you who are not familiar of who we are and where we come from. Born during the COVID crisis and first known as the Construction COVID-19 Rapid Response Task Team, what a mouthful, a group that came together to chart a way of how industry could operate under those circumstances at the time. A unique voluntary construction industry collaboration of organizations and businesses from across the sector. It is through this initiative that the ongoing need for and value of an industry body was recognized, and so the Construction Alliance South Africa was established. Today, CASA unites the construction industry under one umbrella, made up of some 39 professionals, contractor, supplier, manufacturer, and other allied industry bodies, essentially the construction value chain. CASA seeks to address the need for broad-based ongoing collaboration, consultation and engagement involving relevant industry stakeholders, and of course, government at various levels. The organization is characterized by professionalism, integrity, relevance, fairness, and transparency. In June this year, CASA was honored with the Industry Partner of the Year Award at the Big Five Southern Africa Construction Impact Awards. This is a distinguished platform that celebrates remarkable achievements in sustainable development, digital advancement, and transformative practices in the construction industry. The aim of the awards is to stimulate progress and innovation in the South African construction sector. Well done, CASA, and thank you to all for the ongoing hard work and dedication. So, back to our focus for today. Construction site disruptions are a reality in our daily, day-to-day businesses within our industry. It is having a significant impact on construction programs and associated costs, as well as the overall health and safety of our industry. Today's webinar aims to provide some insight into this matter and seek strategies for minimizing and managing the risks associated with the impacts thereof. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Mr. John Matthews, the chairperson of CASA. He holds a BCom degree from UCT and is currently the Group CEO of the Garden Cities Group of Companies. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bernadette. And thank you once again for the opportunity. On behalf of the Construction Alliance South Africa, I would like to extend a warm welcome again to each and every one, and thank you for attending this webinar this afternoon. As chairperson, I'd like to acknowledge our Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, the Honourable Minister Zikalala, and all other panelists and participants. Minister, we really value your participation and we look forward to your insights into this matter. Thank you. The term site disruptions evokes many emotions from stakeholders within the built environment. For some, the term has a positive reaction in terms of expected outcome, but it mostly creates negative connotations from existing active members within the built environment. The term also has many definitions, both with perceived positive and negative intentions. In most cases, it occurs post-implementation stage of a particular contract, and this does create a concern in terms of costs, and of course, more disturbing is that it is often accompanied by a threat of violence or the act of violence itself. Site disruptions have many faces and facets, from community groups wanting a piece of the pie, so to speak, with real and legitimate concerns, to the extreme threats of the so-called construction mafia-type organizations wanting 30% of profits. As recently as June this year, the minister was quoted as saying that government wants to put an end to this illegal practice once and for all. The mere threat of these disruptions results in increase in unbudgeted costs because contractors now have to secure their sites and, more importantly, to protect the lives of their workers on site. Minister Zikalala goes on in that article to quote that 682 cases of extortion-related cases are being investigated, and the same article claims that some 68 billion rand have purportedly been lost as a result of these blockages and disruptions prior to the pandemic. One can just imagine how much is lost subsequent to the pandemic with these actions. There have been many talks on various platforms with much information being shared. That being said, it is often confusing and some information is even contradictory as to how stakeholders should deal with these actions. As CASA, which represents some 39 organizations and associations active in the construction industry, it would be remiss of it not to address our members' concerns and in every way possible deal with it in order to find a solution to ensure the safety and security of all involved. In many instances, parties that are affected by this scourge is requested to come forward in order to stamp out this behavior. But we know in reality, it is not always possible to do this because of threats, whether they be veiled or not. And many contractors suffer in silence rather than risking their own lives or the lives of others on their sites. We look forward to this panel discussion that I know will be robust and thought-provoking in order for us to move a step closer to finding real solutions to these challenges that are crippling an already ailing economy. we need to be reminded that this sector of our economy is always referred to as the employment catalyst. But we just cannot seem to be unlocking that catalytic approach with these peripheral issues that stakeholders have to deal with before creating real employment and adding value to this economy. Thank you to all for agreeing to participate, and I hope everyone will find value in this session today. I now hand you back to the MC. Thank you, Bernadette.
Thank you, John, for that very pertinent introduction in terms of how serious this issue is to our industry. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to our Honourable Minister, Zikalala, the Minister of Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. He holds a degree in Communication Science from the University of South Africa, an honours degree in Public Administration, as well as a master's degree in Leadership Studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Mr. Zikalala is a champion for gender equality, youth empowerment, and an advocate for quality education. He strongly believes in education and regards it as an indispensable weapon in the arsenal to advocate equality and improve people's quality of life. I hand over now to Honourable Minister Zikalala, the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, for his keynote address. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. My humble greetings to you, Program Director, Ms. Eksteen. May I greet also Mr. Matthews, the Chairperson of the Construction Alliance South Africa, also Mr. Deon, the leadership of Crema Media, the sponsors, facilitator, and all panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We participate in this discussion today, which is seized with the important matter of site disruption, which is afflicting the construction industry. It is important that we all speak with one voice in condemning site disruption and extortion affecting this sector. It is even more important that we act together to root out this illegal practice, which is bringing disrepute and driving away investment in the South African construction and property sector. We're grappling with the challenge that we may characterize as maybe the lack of social cohesion in our country, which permits and give rise to criminality. This is why former President Nelson Mandela was so courageous to raise issues of social cohesion and unity. Madiba taught us that we must ensure that there is always harmony and integration in South Africa and among the society. It was also him, after 1994, who called on the nation to go through the reconstruction and development program, not that RDP that was adopted, but the RDP of the soul, so that we'll be able to overcome racial, gender discrimination, but also be able to coexist as an integrated society. 30 years into our democracy, we are nearly 30 years into democracy, and there are a number of challenges that still affect us. Challenges of poverty, challenges of inequality. But having said so, I must hasten to say there is no grievance among these that would justify site disruption, extortion, and sabotage of the economy. There are a number of views as to why we are facing this situation. The number of factors that are analyzed. On one hand, there are those who say they are feeling marginalized, excluded from participating in economic opportunities in the country. They argue that contracts from government are given to one and the same companies. They argue that when government says for any contract that is above 30 million, then 30% must be subcontracted. They argue that they are not given space to participate even in that 30%. But on the other hand, there are those who say we try to ensure that we accommodate, but those we accommodate, small companies that we accommodate, sometimes don't offer quality work and they don't fulfill their obligations. This argument further says those who are disrupting are sometimes given work but don't want to do work. Instead, they demand money. Now, we must be able to confront this situation and deal with it in a way that will ensure that legality is preserved. Firstly, our approach is that we must have a consensus around key areas. One, that construction is the backbone of the economy and social development. Whether you talk of schools, hospitals, that involve construction. And therefore, we should use construction as a pillar for economic growth and recovery, as per the instruction of the president, as he announced when he presented the economic recovery and reconstruction plan, which seek to respond to the effect of COVID-19. So there is a need to unleash infrastructure development. And as the department, we are coordinating that. We're coordinating that through Infrastructure South Africa, so that all catalytic projects are expedited and implemented. We're expediting that through the work of the department, the construction unit in the department. But various departments also are engaged in unleashing infrastructure. Central, in particular, on roads. There is development of dams through the Department of Water and Sanitation. So I think we must have the consensus that South Africa needs to focus on infrastructure development. Secondly, in doing so, we must be able to ensure that big companies support small companies. And in dealing with that fact, we must firstly address collusion among big companies, because collusion leads to high cost and government or the clients end up paying a lot. And we must work in a transparent way. And those who continue to engage on collusion must be disciplined decisively. Thirdly, we must ensure that all companies remain committed to the transformation of this country. Focus in supporting small businesses or small contractors, support youth, women, and people who are disabled. In doing so, the policy commitment of localization must be preserved in all areas. When we say 30% must be allocated to small companies if the contract is above 30 million. That must be done by all of us. It is important that we continue to work together to meet the targets that we have agreed upon in the transformation charter of the built environment. And therefore, if we follow these steps, we must then be able to ensure that if there are projects that are executed, those projects are properly consulted in a way that if a project is to be implemented in a particular municipality, the leadership of the municipality must be briefed, community must be briefed, and ensure that there is a buy-in. We must then ensure that there is constant engagement and report back. And that is why we have taken a view as the department that we are going to strengthen a social facilitation unit within the department. Companies in allocating these 30% must also be transparent, ensure that it is localized. Yes, it will be to support small company. If you take one company, making an example from Cape Town, and work with it in Bloemfontein, but it will not fulfill the localization. It will help us that if big companies are doing work, subcontracting is allocated to local companies. And that's why we are engaging with the CIDP to ensure that we constantly train companies that are in the CIDP and provide them with relevant skills. Contractors must refuse to pay bribes to public officials, to people who will come extorting. We must also work together to protect whistleblowers and not risk their lives. Ensure that once people indicate that there is a potential of disruption, those people are protected, but also decisive actions must be taken against those who are disrupting sites. Kingpins must be arrested. Arrest must be made, as we have said that about 605 cases have been opened and a number of people have been arrested. But there must be prosecution and sentencing of such people. In all, we believe that construction is the backbone of the economy. It is through construction that we can ensure economic growth. Construction has multiple effects in that it supports many sectors, but once you put infrastructure development, it is easy for other investors to come in and invest. Now, we must therefore work together in transforming the industry and make South Africa work and work for all of us. We must ensure that those who are found to be on the opposite side of this framework are dealt with according to the law, and decisiveness needs to prevail at all times. We would want to support all associations that are representing stakeholders or companies in the construction industry. We would also want to continue engaging and tap from their understanding, their practical experience, but we want to emphasize, let us turn South Africa into a giant construction site. Let us make South Africa construction industry work and work for all, and let's leave no one behind. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, for those words that have outlined the challenges of what the industry is facing and the approach that government is taking towards assisting both the public and the private sector to address these concerns. So now I'd like to move on to our panel discussion around this matter of construction site disruptions, the strategies for minimizing the impact of site disruptions and managing the risks associated therewith. The panel discussion will be facilitated by Mr. Gareth Newham, who heads the Justice and Violence Program at the Institute for Security Studies, the ISS. The ISS consists of a team of people working to inform government policy and practices and promote public awareness on effective responses to preventing and reducing violence, crime and corruption, and improving the performance of the criminal justice system in South Africa. The panel this afternoon consists of the following individuals, and we'd like to thank them for their time in participating here today. Firstly, the Minister of Public Works, Minister Zikalala, Mr. Gregory Mofokeng, the Vice President of the Black Business Council, Mr. Euan Massey, Director of MDA Attorneys, and Kile Mteto, who represents the South African women in plumbing and trades. Thank you all, and I'll hand you over to Gareth.
Thank you very much, Bernadette, to the Minister, and to everybody participating in today's seminar on the panel, and of course the audience. As was said by the Minister in his opening address, this issue of disruptions in the construction industry is a very serious one, causing huge damage to our economy and our ability to use construction in a way that really drives economic development and prosperity. And we've seen that this problem has actually been growing for some time now. I think it was first picked up in around 2016, and we've seen quite a big shift and growth in this problem over the last 5 or 6 years since then. Unfortunately, this is but one of a problem area in what we have seen as a notable increase in violent organized crime undermining our country over most of the past decade, with a particular increase over the last 5 or 6 years or so. Towards the end of last year, 2022, we partnered with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime to launch their strategic organized crime risk assessment for South Africa. This report was drafted and developed in order to provide all of us with a better understanding of the growth, impact, and harm that organized crime and illicit markets do to the people of South Africa, how these markets interact with each other, and then to provoke debate about how we could better respond to the problem. What would we need to do in order to get on top of this growing and dangerous problem, which the report says poses an existential threat to our country? Very briefly, we know that organized crime in South Africa has 5 key characteristics. It's diverse. It affects a very diverse section of markets and economic activity. Some organized crime actors participate in multiple criminal markets and enterprises. It is connected, secondly, across various illicit markets. For example, those dealing in firearms are generally connected to most other forms of violent organized criminal activity. It's also connected both regionally and internationally. Thirdly, that it's embedded in our state and private institutions. It's connected to those with political power at local, provincial, and national levels for the purposes of protection and to ensure options for expansion of illegal activity in illicit markets. So it's highly organized and increasingly becoming enmeshed in our formal institutions. Fourthly, it's entrepreneurial, with criminal actors and networks becoming increasingly organized and strategic, with a focus on expanding their activity and entering into new markets and locations, with the ultimate focus we've seen more recently of reinventing themselves as legitimate business entities. And fifthly, is that it is extremely violent. This is for the purpose of ensuring impact in order to achieve its objectives, ensuring network discipline so that people remain loyal and focused on their tasks, and to promote recruitment both of the actual criminal actors, but to ensure compliance by those who do not want to face violence from them. The willingness to use and engage in violence by these criminal networks and actors has given to a new impetus in the rise of assassins for hire as a particular market. So those are the 5 characteristics of organized crime in South Africa at the moment. And there are many reasons for the growth, and we've had some of these referred to by the minister, who's spoken about high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, which are push factors. But that's not sufficient for the levels of organized criminality. Whereas the foot soldiers might be of the most lowest economic rungs, the kingpins and those that operate various parts of these networks are certainly not necessarily suffering from poverty. What we have seen over the past decade has been the severe deterioration of the state's intelligence and law enforcement capabilities, partly as a result of the state capture project. For example, starting with the shutting down of the Scorpions unit, which was not only good at tackling corruption, but also dealing with complex organized crime networks. Aggressive attempts to neutralize most security agencies starting in 2009 and continuing until around 2018 saw a substantial depletion of the capability across all state security agencies. And for example, between 2012 and 2020, the ability of the South African Police Service to solve murder dockets dropped by 55%. This despite its budget growing by 86% in this period. So that currently we have over 180,000 people in the South African Police Service with a current annual budget of over 108 billion rand. But only 14.5% of murder dockets are closed as solved, meaning that a vast majority of those who use murder to forward their ends are getting away with this activity. The decline in the state's law enforcement capabilities opened up the space for the growth of those who are willing to use violence for criminal purposes, as the chances of being held accountable continually decline. And of course, extortion is very much a part of this, targeting many areas across our economic landscape, with the construction industry becoming a particular focus because of the large budgets that are typically involved in construction projects. Now, while a range of multi-sectoral interventions are required to address organized crime, the most important intervention will have to be that of improving our law enforcement and intelligence capability to deal with these networks and syndicates. They will not stop unless there is the very real threat that they are in jail, that they lose their assets, and that their networks are dismantled. That is the only thing that stops them. Once they're on this path, there's very little else you can do. Target hardening and a range of other private security initiatives can help you understand and respond to risks as they emerge. But until there is a very real chance of the state coming to play and making sure that these groups and individuals are held directly and personally accountable, it is highly unlikely that other interventions will do much to adequately and sustainably reduce this challenge. So we really need to see very clear, specific plans at improving our crime intelligence and investigatability and resources, to focus on identifying and dismantling these criminal networks, seizing the assets, and ensuring that the kingpins are being put in jail. And that must be publicly announced. We often hear of so many cases are being investigated, so many arrests are being made. It doesn't help to arrest the foot soldiers. They are easily replaced. We need to see much higher arrests going through the entire value chain. There must be dedicated components of the National Prosecuting Authority guiding and working with investigators so that the evidence that is most likely to result in convictions on serious charges is brought before the courts as a matter of urgency. And this will need, again, a dedicated plan of the SAPS leadership working in close partnership with the NPA, and then a range of other critical role players that are both involved in the industry, but that can bring other analytical and substance skills to bear. Until we see that taking place, until we see the kingpins going to jail, other interventions are likely to not have the same kind of effect that we need in order to really unleash the economic potential of our economy growing unhindered by continuous attacks by criminal networks. Having said that, I would now like to open up to our panel. We've just heard from the Honourable Minister, whose inputs and insights are most welcome. But I'd like to invite each of the other panelists just to make an opening remark for a few minutes, say about 5 minutes, just to give their take, anything they would like to raise as important from their perspective that they'd like to see this discussion deal with today, and any responses they might have had from what has been said before. So can I please hand over to Gregory Mofokeng from the Black Business Council, just to make some opening remarks for, say, about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gareth, for the opportunity. And let me first and foremost recognize the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister Sihle Zikalala in our midst. Let me also recognize the Chairperson of CASA, Mr. John Matthews, and all the colleagues in the management structures of CASA and the rest of the colleagues in the construction industry. Colleagues, I just wanted to make a few observations and also to put on the table a few proposals. In addition to the problem statement as clearly articulated by the Minister, one of the most serious fundamental impacts that the site disruptions are having, and we are not talking sufficiently about that, is the fact that it has a direct impact on economic growth as well as job creation. Beyond just the people that are employed to build this infrastructure, the very infrastructure that we are building as an industry is being utilized for economic activity. So if you are stopping a shopping mall from being constructed, you are actually stopping the shops from operating, you are stopping or delaying employment of people in those shops. And so the same can be said about all manner of infrastructure that is being built by the construction industry. One of the issues that we have observed is that, as the industry, we are actively cooperating with the police. Although the Minister has, already put on the table the number of arrests that we've seen, the fact of the matter is that the situation has unfortunately worsened. So as much as we are cooperating with the police, we've had in certain instances, where contractors had to go to court to secure court interdicts because the police just did not do what we expect them to do. So beyond, the police inactivity, as contractors, we have also tried other means to try and bring about law and order as far as our sites are concerned. And I must add, colleagues, that unfortunately, in most of these instances, the very, criminals do not respect the court interdict. So we find ourselves in a situation where, once again, we either have to go back and rely on the police to make sure that those court interdicts are enforced. And I must hasten to say, the court will issue an interdict against individuals. So we do know these individuals. Those individuals are stated on this court interdicts. But really, what we are not seeing from the side of law enforcement agencies is increased activity in terms of making sure that these very criminals are arrested and brought to book and that they can be duly sentenced. One of the observations, Minister, is that we have seen now more and more politicians being co-opted, especially at the local level, where you find that some of these criminals, in fact, pitch up on construction sites to talk to main contractors with the councillors. So you find that the councillors are now also involved in this whole unfortunate incident, where they are actually encouraging people, to come and stop projects simply because certain individuals, and I must add this, certain individuals in the community are not directly benefiting. As the construction industry, we are geared towards empowering local subcontractors. We are geared towards creating employment for the locals. But the problem comes in where people are saying it is me who is not benefiting, therefore this project must stop. And of course, we are seeing an increase in terms of those that do want to get money for doing absolutely nothing. And insofar as some of the solutions are concerned, Gareth, I think one of the issues that we need to do is to again try to work closely with the police. We as the Black Business Council had an opportunity to engage with the Minister of Police about 2 weeks ago at our annual summit, and he did articulate some of the challenges that the police have in terms of boots on the ground. And we are hoping that this problem can be resolved by the police because they are training more police personnel. And we are hoping that once some of these recruits are released from training colleges, they will be able to be deployed in areas where we are implementing projects, and they can be able to be visible and act as a deterrent. Number two, we definitely at the CASA level, we are looking at how we can amend the contracts that we're using in the industry in order to protect the interest of the contractors, so that we are able to mitigate, especially the risk, the financial risk for contractors. And lastly, we are seeing increase in terms of threats to our staff, both on and off site. And I think in that instance, we will have to come up with strategies as the construction industry to see how do we best secure the safety of our personnel, both on and off site. And I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks we can then be able to make to put in front of the industry ideas that can then be able to be engaged with and implemented as an initiative from the construction industry. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mofokeng, for that. That was very insightful. May I now please hand over to Euan Massey from MDA Attorneys for opening statements.
Thank you, Gareth. Good afternoon to Minister Zikalala, to John Matthews. Thank you to Creamer Media and to CASA for hosting today's webinar. I think it's much needed. And I know that, Gareth, you most certainly put some perspective on it. I think we need to go back in time in order to give a true perspective to the disruptions which are plaguing our industry. MDA Attorneys are construction specialists, and we have acted in the construction industry for the past 20 years. And we've been involved in so-called site disruptions since probably about 2008, 2009. And it first reared its head in respect of the Eskom, Medupi and Kile contracts, where both those projects were heavily plagued by massive amounts of site disruption. That was largely around pay issues, and I think similar issues to what we are faced with today. But what seemed to add fuel to the fire, so to speak, was the release of the 2017 regulations, the procurement regulations, which legislated the 30% requirement for local participation. Unfortunately, I think that a particular sector of society grabbed hold of these regulations and decided to make the most of it. And there's certain uncertainty in the regulations which has allowed them to do that. So if we look at, for example, which is unrelated to today's discussion, the 90-10 scoring principle, last year the Constitutional Court said in the Afri-Business case that there was uncertainty, and we now have the 2022 regulations to address that. But insofar as the 2017 regulations are concerned, the 30% local participation requirement has created uncertainty around the word local. And Minister Zikalala was referring to localization. And there is a large misunderstanding in our society regarding the word local. Is local South African? Is it provincial? Is it municipal? Or is it related to the area adjacent to the site where the work is being performed? And that has allowed, to our mind at MDA, a lot of these institutions, call them institutions, these organizations, these mafia-like organizations, to extort money from contractors and to disrupt progress of contracts on site. And that's the situation that we're faced with today. It's not new. It's been around for quite some time. And I am genuinely pleased to see that there is a real interest in trying to tackle the scourge which we are faced with, because it just simply has such a perverse negative effect on our economy that it just simply has to be dealt with. Just some of the comments in relation to some of the things that have already been said. I completely agree with Minister Zikalala that we have to act with one voice in terms of addressing this issue. I think that up until now, that hasn't happened. There's been a lack of unity amongst all role players in how this is addressed. And it seems that more recently, there's been a real desire to work together to get to the bottom of this problem. So I completely support that particular statement. And then also the statement that the construction industry is a backbone of our economy. It's a large employer in our economy, and it is the catalyst for economic growth, not only in terms of the infrastructure which is the result of the construction industry, but in terms of the jobs which it creates and the businesses it creates from the chain of businesses from employers down to contractors, down to suppliers, and down to subcontractors. And then, of course, through the employment of labor. The 30% requirement, it seems to us that this is now being understood to be a shared responsibility. When the regulations were first enacted, the approach that was taken by many employers was that this was something which was subcontracted down, or contracted down rather, to the contractors, and they were left alone to implement the 30% requirement. It seems more recently that there's a recognition that in order to achieve the 30% requirement, there has to be commitment from all role players, including the state-owned employers, which is very important. It's critical to achieving this objective. We can't have projects where we have a blanket 30% requirement where the work that's being executed just doesn't accommodate that 30% requirement. There has to be some objective way of achieving the 30% requirement and some thought given behind that, which we can talk about a bit later. Also, the approach has to be holistic. Up until now, and some of the things which have been said already, is that it's a reactive approach to dealing with this particular problem. So the problem occurs, we rush off to court, we get an interdict, we arrest people, we do all of those things. It also has to be proactive. At the outset of projects, we need to identify the target enterprises who the 30% will be awarded to, how it will be awarded to them, and how the 30% target will be achieved, so as to ensure that that money is properly spent to organizations and people and entities who are going to make the best of that money and create new businesses and grow the economy, not to people who are simply going to use that money for further extortion and further crime. One or two comments on what Gregory had to say as well in terms of the interdicts. As I've already said, it's a reactive measure, and also one with limited success. He mentioned that in order to achieve an interdict, you have to get it against certain individuals. That's 100% correct. And often what we see with business forums, illicit business forums, there's construction mafia organizations, is that different foot soldiers appear and do the work. An interdict is obtained against those particular individuals. And once that's obtained, another set of individuals arrive on site and disrupt the progress of the work. So it's really an ineffective strategy long term to combat site disruptions. And then also the comment on amending the contracts in industry. We use 4 standard form contracts in our industry, and only one of them, which is a locally produced general conditions of contract for civil engineering contracts, actually deals with this particular issue in any way whatsoever. The other standard form contracts don't deal with it. And what we've seen is that more recently, organizations like SANROL, who are probably taking the lead from a government perspective, have gone out and amended the FIDIC, which is an international form of contract. They've amended their contract quite substantially to allow for a lead-in period to promote local participation. And then also for dealing with site disruption, when it does occur on site, how is it dealt with between SANROL and the contractor and the other stakeholders in a transparent way so that everyone's rights are protected? Those are my opening remarks. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. Could I now please hand over to Ms. Mteto from the South African Women in Plumbing and Trades to make some opening statements. Over to you, Ms. Mteto.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for the opportunity. Let me take this opportunity to recognize the presence of the Honourable Minister, Sihle Zikalala, the chairperson of CASA, and the MENCO of CASA, and allow me to say all protocol observed in this regard, as we also recognize the presence of the captains of the industry. Site disruptions have a significant impact on the economy of the country, given the fact that the infrastructure is one of the most biggest contributors of our GDP, as my fellow panelists have alluded. The stoppage of works on site by site disruption increases the cost of doing business for businesses. The impact is felt mostly by the SMMEs, especially the women-owned entities, as they are at the bottom of the food chain in accessing the opportunities of the sector. And by the way, there is already a new innovation of doing things in terms of this criminality, because whilst we're still focusing on the issue of the extortions, the criminals have now moved to a new way of disrupting sites, like for instance, invading projects, especially human settlement projects that are incomplete. Whilst we're busy working over the weekend, when you come back on Monday, your whole site is invaded and the houses that are still incomplete have now been invaded and you cannot be able to continue with the project. And having said that, it's very unfortunate that when you get to report the matter, the current agreements, which I will not call necessarily the contracts, because the Department of Human Settlements, for instance, is using a different contract that is mostly a memorandum of agreements. And you find that most of the situation, or most of the contract, favors the employer, which is the Department of Human Settlements, and it does favor the contractor. And if they were using the other forms of contracts, I think things would be different. So having said that, you'll find that at the end of the day, you as a contractor, you are bearing the responsibility of ensuring that those people who have invaded the project actually get to be removed, because the client will tell you that according to the contract, until such time that you've handed over the complete project, the project belongs to you and it remains being your baby. When you get to the police station to try and report the matter and do all sorts of things, and even go into the courts to go and get your interdicts and all of that stuff, you find that the police are actually even aware of who are the people that are playing, who are playing in the space. And they'll tell you that it's a former particular gang. They even name them by names, but nothing much gets to be done. Now, as SAWIPT, we are an organization that focuses on developing the skills for the artisans and professionalizing the sector in partnership with our industry partners, such as your PRIB and your IOPSA. When sites are disrupted, this means that the opportunity is stolen for skills development. The trade space is regarded as specialized works by the CIDB classification of works. Therefore, it means that there is very little people that are playing in that particular space. With the statistics currently are showing the disparity in the representation of women in these trades, the dream of achieving the 40% target of procurement from women-owned entities or targeted groups, as pronounced by the President of the country, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the launch of the WeCorner on the 9th of August in 2020, remains another pipeline dream. A decisive action needs to be taken and implemented amidst the ambits of the law. As a country, it cannot be allowed that criminality reigns supreme. Because when we fail to deliver on infrastructure spend, that becomes a constitutional infringement of the right of the citizens of South Africa. And in all fairness, I think in other countries, this will be regarded as espionage. Having said the above, it is imperative that failure to deliver service to the people must not be masked by the site disruptions, where there is a legitimate need for transformation. There has to be a solution provided by government, private sector, and the communities to curb the site disruptions led by criminal activity. We as SAWIPT, we are willing to partake and to participate, and we have in other forums actually raised our hands to say we can be able to work together with government to ensure that the sites are not necessarily being that disrupted. So the efforts that we've put together, as organizations to say, let us work with the police. You'll find that there is a steering committee, for lack of a better way, that gets to be formed between government, business, and the police and the community members. But the steering committee ends up disappearing from the thing, from the earth, because it's either the person who's supposed to be chairing it is no longer interested, they're no longer attending meetings. So whatever ways may be and solutions that you would have discussed as a group to ensure that at least we do eradicate the site disruptions completely where possible, the whole exercise becomes futile, because now the grouping that had been formed, or the subcommittee that had been formed, does not become effective anymore. So we would like to see government doing more and being decisive, because government is the one that is holding the key, and that can be able to lead to ensure that law and enforcement is being done in this country. We have heard enough of the challenges that they are having, and we are being consoled in a way by the fact that at least there's going to be increase in number of the police that are there. But we must not forget the fact that some of the police or the people that are serving in the SAPS are actually part of these people that are actually performing this criminality. So we need to see more commitment from government, because government, bottom line is that they are the biggest employer, to ensure that the policies that are there, that are available, are being leveraged. And I'm talking about policies such as your public procurement policies and regulations that are there. We need to ensure that the 30% that we are forever talking about, which is the source of our problems today, has to be communicated properly through the social development and the information that is being shared at the beginning of projects with the community, so that they understand what is this 30% all about and how can this 30% be utilized to ensure that empowerment and the targets are being met within the community. So the sooner we also get to have the public procurement bill out there, be gazetted, I think the better will things get to be with our time. I think the rest of the other things my colleagues have alluded to, and I will not repeat for the sake of time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mteto. I'll now just give the Minister as well a chance before we open up for question and answers. And please do note, if you want to ask a question, place that question in the Q&A section of or tab at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat section, so that we know that there's a specific question that needs to be addressed by the panelists. Mr. Minister, can I hand over to you just to respond to some of the points that you might have heard from some of the panelists, and then we'll go into an open Q&A with the participants.
No, thanks once more for affording us the opportunity to engage. I think I would like to deal with 3 points or 3 points. The first one is the comment by Ms. Mteto around steering committees. I think that is critical, but if you find that it's not working because of a particular individual who's not interested, I think as the department, we are putting in place a social facilitation unit that will be able to intervene and then ensure community participation, ensure all stakeholders are actively involved in project, and ensure that the project management is done effectively. The second issue, I would concur with a view that says, yes, police have not been effective, but I think there is a unit now that is in place, which came after the intervention by the president. And I would say since the unit came into being, which is the Organized Crime Investigation Detective Services, there are results that we see. Though we have not reached a point where we see kingpins being arrested and sentenced, which is quite key. The involvement of councillors needs to be taken up, because if councillors do that, if we get that report, we will be able to engage with councils through speakers and then be able to take disciplinary actions against those councillors. So I conclude again by saying we need to work together. We need a platform where we coordinate together in each area, and that's why we need to use the district development model as an anchor of the coordination, so that we're able to intervene timelessly and avoid any disruption or delay. May I take the opportunity also to comment on the issue of the public procurement bill? It is already in a process of consultation, and I think the Minister of Finance will release it soon for public comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I will now move over to our question and answers. I'll read out the questions that are there to the panelists and see who he's able to answer it. I'll do a batch of questions. The first questions that I have here come from Marara Mosing Manga and asks a question that has been partially answered or mostly answered. What measures does the government have in place to protect society from and implementation agents from these people who are disrupting construction sites? I think we've had some answers around that. Development of or establishment of new unit in the organized crime component of the South African Police Service, and your own department setting up a unit to make sure that there's engagements and deals with committees and that. But if you want to add more to that, that would be possible there. Somebody called Rakwena Kekana has asked, said, Mr. Matthews mentioned billions of rands lost prior to COVID due to disruptions and cases of extortion being investigated. Do we know if there is buy-in from government to work with the private sector to finalize cases, since we understand that the NPA is overloaded with state capture cases? And just from my input there, I think you'll find the NPA is overloaded with all kinds of cases. They receive around 900,000 dockets a year and are able to achieve finalization in about, as of last year, around 130,000 cases a year. And that's with about 4,000 prosecutors. So I think you'll find that they certainly are working hard, although it might not be as strategic as we'd like to see. We have Mr. David Madisa says, how do we ensure that the justice and security cluster comes to the table to ensure that we're not plunged into the law of the jungle? Do we have to resign ourselves to those that have more guns? And how do we protect whistleblowers? And then we have Lee Chone saying the 30% the minister is referring to is for public works only. This is not a legal requirement for private sector contracts. How is government going to stop the criminal element from enforcing this on the private sector, as it is not a legal requirement? And then we have, what is the minister's take on construction mafias? How do we combat such threats to the industry? I think the minister has already spoken quite clearly about his approach to that and what needs to happen. There's another question to the minister saying that 605 cases have been opened. Could you please indicate the period of time of the arrests and what has happened to date with these cases? I'm not sure if the minister will have that information at hand, but I'll give an opportunity shortly. And then we have Dennis Mklanga. What is the financial cost of construction site disruptions to date? Please indicate the timeframes or the dates. And where are the disruptions most concentrated, the regions? Okay, then I think we have another one about the fact that the 22 preferential procurement regulations do not make reference to the 30% subcontracting. It is important for organs of state to include this clause in the SCM policy should they wish to apply the subcontracting. And then there's a question to the minister again asking about what government is doing in relation to lifestyle audits, and are these being acted upon in terms of the KPAs and KPIs that President Ramaphosa promised he would do years ago. I will take one more and then I'll hand it back to the panel to respond to some of these and to some of the other issues raised. We have Bafikile Bonke Simelane, who says, thank you very much for the Honourable Minister's opening remarks and for his attendance at this event. With a specific remark about turning South Africa into a large construction site or something to that effect, what is the Honourable Minister's view about the seeming recruitment of South African construction graduates by the Irish government with the active support and encouragement and endorsement of our own Department of Employment and Labour? Does this not undermine and negatively reflect negatively on the various mandates and efforts on what the DOEL should classify itself in terms of scarce skills and occupations? Shouldn't we be intensifying our efforts to retain such skills, notwithstanding globalization and mobility of skills and talents? Okay, I will stop there. You can see a kind of range of different issues. I see there's still quite a few questions, and I'll get back to them once I've given the panel a few minutes each to respond to that. Perhaps, Minister, since I see that there are a number of questions posed directly to you, maybe I'll hand over to you first and then open it up to some other panelists to perhaps add where they might have information relevant to the question. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you. I think the first, in terms of the period, is, I would say, 2 years. If we talk about the cases that we refer to that are 605. The concentration I would say for now, it's KwaZulu-Natal that is highly affected by this sketch. Then the cost, it's estimated, as we say, the cost will be caused by delays, and some will end up even not pursuing those projects. We've said that according to the report, it is 68 billion. My final question, it's lifestyle audit. Currently, the president is conducting the lifestyle audit in all cabinet ministers and the senior management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'll now hand over to Mr. Gregory Mofokeng for you to add any other points that you might make to what's been raised in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I think I'll tackle two issues: the involvement of the security cluster. That's a question by David Madisa. I think this issue through the industry, highlighting it to decision makers, especially our leaders in government, has been mentioned in two consecutive State of the Nation addresses. It has been mentioned by the Minister of Police in no less than 3 budget speeches. So we have, in fact, made sure that it does preoccupy the minds and hearts of our political leaders. What we do want to see is exactly that, the involvement of the security cluster, so that this is given prominence, it is given priority, and also resources to make sure that we deal with this issue effectively. Because now, if you look at even the recent events on the torching of trucks, I think criminals are now becoming even more brazen. And if we don't act, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where this whole issue is completely out of control and we cannot control it. And we will now be ruled by gangs who determine how and when and at what cost construction projects are going to be implemented in this country. So we do want to see the involvement of the security cluster, not only to discuss this issue, but to deploy the necessary resources to deal effectively with it. We will continue to raise it, and hopefully, we will get the necessary response, from government in particular. The regions, I just want to add to that issue. I think the minister has already alluded to the fact that KZN remains the hotspot. However, I want to add to that to say that we are now seeing copycats throughout the country. It is no longer only happening extensively in KZN. We are definitely in the midst of a wave of these incidents happening throughout the country. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mofokeng. Over to you, Mr. Massey. Anything else you want to add from what's been raised?
Yeah. Thanks, Gareth. The very first question was regarding what measures does the government have in place. I think it's mostly been answered, but there is also a statutory regime which protects all citizens in respect of extortion, racketeering, and intimidation. There are 3 acts in particular which could be used to address what we're currently facing in the construction industry. They're the Intimidation Act, the Regulation of Gatherings Act, and the Prevention of Organised Crime Act, which Minister Zikalala spoke about, the new unit that's been put in place regarding organised crime, and that would be under the auspices of that last act that I spoke about. So in addition to the measures already raised, there is also a statutory and legislative framework which works as well. The difficulty, of course, is getting people impacted, mostly individuals who are affected and impacted by this site disruption, to actually go to the police station and lay a charge. I know personally of a number of individuals who have left the construction industry because of intimidation. And some of those, it goes into the last question, I think, regarding the movement of skills to Ireland. Ireland is but just one beneficiary of the South African construction industry. New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Canada are all countries which are benefiting from an exodus of critical skills from our industry, which has been driven by a number of factors, not just the site disruptions that we're talking about, but there is a certain percentage of people who are leaving because they have been threatened with their lives or have had acts of violence carried out against them. Just on a few more comments on some of the other questions with regards to the costs of site disruption. I think it's very difficult to put a complete cost on it. I think it's probably better to look at, well, who carries that cost? So where the government is carrying that cost, where that does happen in certain instances, that cost is carried by the taxpayers, and that's the fiscus pays for that cost. So ultimately, the individuals and the companies who pay their taxes are paying for the costs of the extortion. There are also instances where the contractors and subcontractors who are affected by these site disruptions cannot recover the cost. So they are also covering or carrying the cost as well. So that cost is spread around, and it's very difficult to isolate exactly how much is being carried by the employers and how much is being carried by the contractors and subcontractors. The other question regarding the private sector versus the public sector, and I've seen on the Q&A questions, there are quite a few questions around, what exactly does the 30% apply to? It applies to the public sector, and it applies to projects in excess of 30 million rand. Be that as it may, these organizations don't operate only in the public sector. And as Gregory said, it's not only localized to KZN, it's all around South Africa now. And it happens to both the public and private sector. I think on that score, we could probably learn something from the mining industry, who have also been plagued by a similar phenomenon, but have taken it head on, and the mines themselves have implemented processes whereby they are involved with the local communities around the mines and identify opportunities for local participation. And through that, the local communities have in turn acted against these criminal elements who seek to arrive on the mines and disrupt progress of projects and the like. So I think there are some learnings from the mining industry as well. Those are my comments, Gareth, on the questions that were raised.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Mteto, would you like to respond to anything that has been raised so far?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Gareth. From where I am sitting, I would like to actually respond to the first question that is talking about whether the PPB, which is the preferential procurement bill, will actually assist, to resolve this problem. And my response to that is that yes. And with that, yes, I have got a serious however. And that however speaks to the fact that if all the inputs that have been made by the public and also by the organized business can be taken into consideration when they are putting together that procurement bill, it will assist, because most of the information that we had shared and the inputs that we've made as organized business is stemming from the experiences that we've had, is also stemming from the openness of the regulations to different interpretations. You find that what the community or what the private sector is perceiving as a particular point, the public sector is actually interpreting it differently. So we need to curve and ensure that we do not necessarily have open-ended kind of interpretation. So that means the ambiguity that has been currently existing on the preferential procurement regulations has got to be addressed. And those are some of the things that we intended when we made those submissions. But as we know, most of the time you make those submissions, you take the time to assist government. And by the time that bill it gets coming for public commenting, all the things that you have submitted as organized businesses have not been taken into consideration. So I'm hoping that this time around that has been done properly. Secondly, in terms of the security spaces, South Africans are actually looking for something very simple from our government, and that is safety and security in everything that we are doing. But now the unfortunate part is that currently our intelligence is actually overwhelmed to a point of being taken over by the criminals. And that is the recipe for disaster for any growing economy. If you're looking at what is currently happening now, you have got foreign investment being seriously threatened by the current situation, especially within the construction space or within the infrastructure space. And we need a lot of money. We need a lot of support and we need a lot of investment that is coming from the foreign countries. But if we do not protect the security and the safety of the foreign investors in this country, we are exacerbating the problem and may end up being a failed state on a serious note. And lastly, I'm glad that the minister is actually taking into consideration, or they have actually established a social facilitation unit within the Department of Public Works and Investment. And I'm hoping that truly, Minister, this is not just a tick box exercise where you're just doing this, because half the time you find that such interventions, you establish a particular department, but you find that that department is not capacitated enough to be able to do its job. Sometimes it's just one or two people, and when you are reporting and saying that there is a particular department that has been specifically established to deal with this kind of a problem, and you find that that department is actually not necessarily capacitated. So capacity is very, very important. And social facilitation is one of the tools that I think are very critical. Because gone are the days where people can just be told that this is what is going to happen. People want to be engaged, and people are getting educated day in and day out. People are learning about how to do business. And the more hungry the people are, the more angrier they get to be on a daily basis. So we need to ensure that social facilitation happens not at the time of the construction or site establishment, but way long before. Then we do the planning together with the communities. We involve the community, and they get to be informed of where are the opportunities that are lying and how are they going to be part of the eating order or part of the participants on particular projects. Because unless that gets to be done, we will continue to have these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mteto. Back to the Q&A. I'm not going to read out every question. Some of these are statements or issues that can't be addressed at this forum, but we'll hand them over to the processes that can be. For example, Mr. Musa Shangase is the president of the MBSA. Wants a case that they've opened since 2014 to be referred to the security cluster by the minister, but I think perhaps I see there that Vakashni Harajan from CASA could answer that or deal with that. We see that there's a question to the minister again about what extent does he think that part of the root cause of the site disruption phenomenon is directly or indirectly attributed to the procurement policy, and will the new public procurement bill respond to address this procurement-related phenomenon? There's an idea about a question about whether those involved in construction mafia who might own or be members of companies be named and shamed or blacklisted so that people know who they are. And then we have a question from Linda Faree, which I think will be answered live as well. It's for the Honourable Minister, based on his opening statement of having to condemn disruptions in the industry and emphasising the need to work together to fight it. What is, in his view, are the recent submissions by the MEC of Department of Public Works and Infrastructure in KwaZulu-Natal pertaining to his intention to negotiate with the group that has disrupted a project for several months? It creates the impression that the Department of Public Works in KwaZulu-Natal wants to recognize and negotiate with criminals instead of dealing with it decisively and addressing it to the full might of the law. I think that is quite an important question, and I think that's been raised a number of times. So perhaps I'll just stop there. Minister, and then there's one from Carol Payton, also to Minister. What is your view on what must happen in the future? There's a new public procurement bill and state institutions set their own preferential procurement. Do you want to see the 30% local subcontracting as an ordinary matter, of course, for government departments with state-owned enterprises? So perhaps maybe I can ask that we just stop there, Minister, and ask for you to respond to those particular questions before moving on. Over to you, Mr. Minister.
Thanks once more. I think the question of what is our take with regard to MEC for Public Works and KZN. I'm not sure whether we have engaged with that statement holistically, or we have just quoted one part or taken one part. My understanding was that the minister, the MEC said he is going to engage, however, the law must prevail. No one must disrupt the project, and the project that was specified there was one of the schools in Umlazi, and he was going to engage them, but not saying that is the replacement of the law. He was clear that the law must take its course. Now, what is the solution? The solution is around what I said, working together. Ensure that we are clear on policies. Follow policies as they are to the latter. Ensure that criminality is isolated. And in that, I must also, as Ms. Mteto alluded, we are going to ensure that this unit of social facilitation is capacitated. It works in advance in all our projects that we are leading, but also we would want to work with other departments in the infrastructure space to ensure that the same is embraced. I think we are not going to underestimate the need of building the capacity of law enforcement agencies, from intelligence to police and investigation that needs to be capacitated. Yes, I have already engaged with Minister Kile on the matter, and I believe he is on board and will continue to put pressure on them that they must be also hands-on in dealing with the matter. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. And I just, there was still a question from Carol Payton about the issue of the 30% local subcontracting as an ordinary matter, of course, for government departments and state-owned enterprises. There's also, I'll go through the list now. I see we're heading towards 3:25, and to keep in time, I think I'll go through what's remaining here and then hand over back to the panelists to respond and then wrap up. There's quite a long question here, but just to summarize, it's about getting access to the infrastructure development plan. But I think what is really important about there is the suggestion that in order to eliminate or minimize the risk is to have subcontractors allocation committee at municipalities, at municipality level, as they have databases. And you can't give the responsibilities of dealing with to poorer contractors who appoint subcontractors. So that's one suggestion. There's a question to the minister whether these business forums are properly structured and what are their mandates. I think we know that in some cases they might be properly structured, but in others they're relatively informal and it's just really a name only. There's a question, there's a issue here about the large amounts of being lost as a result of criminal activity. Does it not merit having a specialized crime unit? The one that can call and report to the onset of site disruptions. I think we now know that there is such a unit within the South African Police Service National Organized Crime component, but perhaps that there should be more information about that in terms of how you can get hold of it in order to address this particular type of organized crime. There's a question about how to deal with or minimize the invasion of construction mafia without affecting or increasing budgeted costs. The issue again of 30% in all projects seems to come up quite a lot. And there's a question directly at Euan to elaborate further how this is being achieved, how to ensure the responsibilities only pushed to the contractor. How can that be addressed and ensure the contractors deal with that? Again, another question about 30%. Okay, we're sort of getting into a point where a lot of the questions are repetitive and saying the same types of things. There's issues of loopholes in the law, issues to do with chief liaison officers and so forth. Okay, I'm just not getting anything really completely new. I'm just going through there is a question from Ed Stoddard about specifically the issue of the 68 billion cost to disruption. Is this over 1 year or over the past 2 years? What period of time has that cost been attributed to? And there's a question about skills development. How do we participate in skills development and transfer of these skills in construction sites? This is from a person whose organization is accredited for occupational qualifications, but finds that the contracts are sometimes established but do not include this kind of skills transfer. How can that be addressed? There's a question related to a different procurement approach for tenders over a value of 10 million rand. Could then SARS be doing lifestyle audits to make sure the tender award itself is not given to friends or people who shouldn't get hold of that tender? Okay, there's another question to the Minister about the social facilitation unit. It would definitely help if the community is also similarly educated. A road campaign would do about these units, particularly those involved in business forums, who this person has found a number of times to be a disruptive force. And has been already indicated by panelists that there's interference by councillors. I think the minister's already addressed how you can deal with this. That needs to be raised with a particular municipality and complaints lodged with the speakers of those municipalities and other political principles. Okay, another question around the 30% and local structures. There's a question here to Mr. Massey. Is the 30% in excess of 30 million of public projects, or is this applicable to private construction projects as well? Okay, Okay, and then a question about how do you know if these community forums are legitimate? Are they registered? Is there a way of finding out when you are approached and they say they're a particular forum? I think there was a question earlier about databases at municipal level. Okay, that's all what's in the quick Q&A at the moment that I can see. There's also, sorry, last couple of things about anti-corruption measures. What anti-corruption measures do public works expect contractors to produce, such as ISO standards? And can you please have some pilot projects when we implement all of that's been discussed so that we can see whether this actually helps? Okay. Now that we have around 10 minutes left for this session, I'm going to stop there and just hand over back to the panelists for final closing remarks. Given that the minister spoke in the last session, I'll give him the final word in this panel. So I will then start with you, Mr. Mofokeng, if you can maybe give your closing remarks to what has been raised here in the question Q&A and what's been said before. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And just to say that this remains a very significant challenge for the industry. And as the industry, we do need to come together to produce solutions to it. And I think, as I said earlier, at the CASA level, we do have a task team that is looking, critically into this matter. And I know that there will be some very good ideas that will come out of that task team, taking into considerations discussions that have transpired in today's webinar. 3 things that I want to conclude with. One is that we do need to protect contractors. And I think this goes to the issue of our contracts. Once sites are stopped, we need to be paid standing time. And I think everybody must understand that, this is a broader problem. As contractors, we are not employed to do social facilitation. I'm glad that the minister has taken a view that the department must have, a unit that deals specifically with, the whole issue of social facilitation. Because as contractors, we are not employed to do social facilitation. We are employed to build. And therefore, when social facilitation has failed and we have to resort to closing the sites, I think it must be clear to all concerned that the contractors have to be paid for standing time. Number 2 is that although the minister has spoken, about the KZN MEC, the fact of the matter is that the reports that we've received is that site had been stopped 7 times already. That's criminal. We cannot accept a situation where a site is stopped 7 times and yet we still want to go and negotiate. I think what should have been the appropriate response is to deploy, police on that site, protect the site whilst negotiations are going on the sidelines. The site has to work because we are denying the community, a service delivery. Families are paying, exorbitant amount of transport costs to get their kids to schools far away from their homesteads when a school is supposed to be built. And most importantly, we are stopping teachers from being employed, admin staff from being employed in that school in the name of local forums that are keen on making sure that the infrastructure is not delivered simply because certain individuals are not benefiting. And I think we have to also be clear about this. As much as we can categorize the torching of trucks as economic sabotage, stopping of construction sites has also to be considered as economic sabotage so that we can, be able to give appropriate response, to this problem. And I think lastly, we all have to be aware that the total sum of some of these solutions does mean that there will be increase in the delivery an increase in the cost of delivering projects, because we have to now look at how do we beef up security whilst our law enforcement agencies, including the police, are still getting their act together. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mofokeng. Can I now hand over to Mr. Euan Massey for your final remarks?
Thanks, Gareth. Just to respond to some of those questions, I think the starting point is to look at what the regulation states in the 2017 regulations. So in response to Jacques Erasmus's question, it says that if feasible, and that word's important, feasible, the subcontracting must take place above a contract with a value of 30 million rand, it's the organ of state who must apply the subcontracting to advanced designated groups. So those are some key words. The one question was, how can employers go about ensuring that the 30% is achieved? And there's been a lot said about removing the scourge and working in unity to do so. But many of the proposals which have been made are reactive. It's about specialized units of police, going to court, all of those kinds of things. But in order to properly remove the scourge that we are faced with, we have to be proactive. And it requires that employers are participative in the process of identifying work which can be subcontracted. And they are therefore required to undertake a number of things. Firstly, to ensure that the work that's being awarded in that contract contains sufficient work that can be subcontracted to advanced designated groups. And that's the feasibility study element to it. So a lot of what's been said as well about sort of capacity within district municipalities. One of the big problems that we have in South Africa is that once we go down the various levels from state-owned enterprises to metropolitan municipalities down to district and local municipalities, those skills evaporate. We don't have the skills in our local and district municipalities to deal with this issue. So one of the answers to the problem is that we have to ensure that there is some improvement in the skills in those local government employers, so as to ensure that when contracts are awarded, they have sufficient work included in that package which can be subcontracted to these advanced designated groups. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. Could I now please hand over to Ms. Mteto for your final remarks?
Now I've got a bit of a delay. I just need to move. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My final remarks are going to talk to the fact that if we do not necessarily solve this problem or deal decisively with this kind of a scourge, we are going to have future problems as far as doing business is concerned within the infrastructure space. I am seeing a situation where even the amendments of the current contracts will have to include the issue of not even if it's not standing time or whatever, but it must include the site disruptions as part of the inherent risks that will come with any project. And we all know that what does that boil to at the end of the day, because it boils on the bottom line. It's either the client has got to pay the brunt or the contractor's got to pay the brunt either way. But that is something that is going to be inevitable if the scourge is not dealt with decisively. Secondly, I would like to propose that we need to look at innovative ways to develop and ensure that local economic development is being dealt with accordingly. One project, one mine, one opportunity in a particular locality will never be able to absorb everybody. That is the fact. Secondly, that one opportunity that comes once in a while will never be able to resolve all the issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in a particular province or in a particular locality. So we need to find a way of how then do we create an opportunity that will address the cry that we are currently seeing from the locals that are saying we do not have enough opportunities to sustain ourselves, from the youth that are saying we do not have enough opportunities to find ourselves being employed. And I'm referring here to your initiatives such as your township economic development. We need to find a way of how then do we invest more, Minister, in the skills development, especially of the artisans. I know that you are on a drive as a Department of Public Works, because we're doing that with your SAWIPT, to looking at how then can we professionalize the artisans? How do we do your ARPLs on the artisans and all of that? But it must not just be for us to tick the boxes. It must be for us to ensure that after those people have been licensed and they have been properly qualified, then how do we take them to the next level of being either business people or getting opportunities? We have got municipalities that are actually non-functional as we speak. And some of the reasons is because we do not have those qualified artisans that we used to have in the olden days. So we can be able to look at how then do the three spheres of government interact with each other and plan with an intention of ensuring that there's continuity instead of the current silo plan that is currently happening. You find that the municipality has got its own database of the so-called artisans. Department of Public Works has got its own people, but at the end of the day, all of these people are not necessarily getting anywhere as far as the job opportunities are concerned. So we need to be decisive, we need to be resolute, and we need to work together as the private sector and the public sector. So this must be done continuously, not when we are envisaging that's going to be a project, because then that becomes reactive. So usually the minister will talk about 800 and something billion rands that is going to be spent over the next 3 years. But what usually happens is that we only react at the time of contracting. Meanwhile, part of this 800 billion rand is supposed to be talking to how then do we capacitate the skills of the places or the areas where this money is intended to be utilized. So in that case, at least by the time the projects land, people are actually in a position to become employable. And you can also have your informal business people that will sustain them in between the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mteto, for those final remarks. Mr. Minister, can I please hand over to you for your closing remarks? Thank you.
No, thanks. May I firstly thank the facilitator for the way you've conducted the session and all other panelists, but also thank the conveners for this opportunity. Firstly, I think we must have a thorough discussion on how to grow infrastructure and the construction industry in the country. I get a sense that there are those who think this subcontracting should be left with government alone. And I think that view needs to be debated. Because if you would say so, you build a mall, you don't involve the local community, and you keep them away, you don't assist in empowering them. So that development will be there, but it will not be owned by the people who are around there. I do believe we need a discussion on that, especially as we go on to finalize the public procurement bill, but also to ensure that as a sector, we are coordinated. I would not agree more with the point on skills. I think Mr. Matthews raised that point, and Mr. Mteto is raising it. Development of skills, we are on the drive on that. We are going to continue with that program, but we must have one database as the country on all of these skills, but also ensure that they are linked with municipalities, provincial government, departments, and the national departments. I believe the concept of the DDM tries to build capacity in our municipalities. I will not run away from the point raised that in our district and local municipalities, we are facing a shortage of skills and quality leadership. But I believe the DDM approach, where ministers are deployed to districts to work with districts together with MECs, should assist us to build that skill, but should bring together the capacity, the technical capacity from departments at that particular level in each and every district. I think growing the economy is quite important in a way that we diversify. I believe we don't need to look at whether we don't need what you will call a construction sector master plan, where we will discuss that this is the master plan, but these are how we implement things. The question of facilitation and all of that. So working together, we must also work on that. We must look on what is it that we will ensure that it's localized. Not everything needs to be imported from other countries. We need to localize even in this built environment. I once again wish to thank all of you. We will be open for engagement with all stakeholders and all organizations. And we are going to have some sessions that are going to bring the industry together so that we have a common plan and we understand what government is doing at what time, and we move together in unison. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Mr. Minister. That was very useful and insightful. From my side, I want to thank the organizers, the conveners, for inviting me to participate in this seminar today. I think it was incredibly insightful, useful. It's clear that we are coming to a consensus here about how to move forward, and there's some interesting and useful developments happening that will hopefully help us get on top of this. So from our side, thanks again, and I'll now hand over back to Bernadette for closing.
Thank you very much, Gareth, and to all the panel members for sharing your thoughts, experiences, and suggesting possible solutions in taking this critical matter forward. I'd like to now ask Mr. Deon van Zyl to wrap up our webinar with the closing remarks. Deon holds a degree in architecture from the University of the Free State and a diploma in project management and a master's degree in urban design from UCT. He's currently the chairperson of the Western Cape Property Development Forum. Over to you, Deon.
Thank you, Bernadette, and also recognizing the Minister. It's wonderful to have a senior government leader in the audience for a full session. So, Minister, thank you for joining us. And of course, also to the organizers and the rest of the panel. I have the privilege to reflect on what I've heard over the last hour and a half, hour and 3/4. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that it is really a miracle when a project breaks ground. We tend to look at construction in isolation, and we're all very frustrated about the construction interference and some of these business communities causing disruption. But we forget that it's probably not more than 1 in 10 projects that actually ever see the day of light. And therefore, we've got to contextualize this debate in a bigger debate. And that is, are we actually serious about building South Africa out of the crisis we are in? So if we can agree that we are serious about building ourselves, and we've all heard many panelists refer to the strategic role of construction industry in job creation and economic growth. But we've got to ask ourselves, are we serious? And if we are serious, then we need to flood the market with opportunity. And if we flood the market with opportunity, there will be a lot of opportunity for many role players. But at the moment in South Africa, our legislation is not aligned. Our planning, environmental, heritage, municipal planning, public finance management, municipal finance management legislation is not coordinated to make sure that there are a plethora of projects. So, Minister, I think we've got to take this debate a little bit back from just the construction debate to a strategic debate on how can we align South Africa to be focused on implementation of new projects. I don't believe we are keeping our construction industry busy enough, and there is only one way to get the construction industry more busy, and that is to flood the industry with opportunity. I think the panelists are also all in agreement that service delivery must not be negotiable. Service delivery must be sacrosanct. The construction industry delivers the stage on which the economy plays out and which creates all of these opportunities. The fact, Minister, that you refer to the social facilitation unit really pricked my ear. We have done some intense research with contractors and developers in the Western Cape, and the consensus is that a project starts and public engagement must start at the point of idea. We cannot leave it to the contractor to have to deal with problems and disruptions right at the end. Development is a marathon. The construction activity is the last final sprint. And therefore, it is imperative that we start to engage with communities right at the start. And the current public participation processes in many of the legislations that I refer to does not address this adequately. We have got to do a contractor identification, subcontractor identification right up front. Then I think we're all in agreement, government must play its role when it comes to safety and security. I think the fact that it has taken more than a decade for the SAPS to take this matter seriously is concerning. We're very encouraged by the fact that there is a specialist unit now in SAPS, and we would like that unit to report directly to you, Minister Zikalala, on statistics and also successes on prosecution. And then lastly, the note that I made here is society must play its role. This is, as I said, not just a contractor problem. This is also a client problem. And importantly, it is civil society's problem as well. These disruptions don't take place in isolation. One of our members coming out of the Township Development Forum made a very good point to us recently, and they said, if you are going to build in an area and you have not engaged a community, you are being disrespectful. And I fully support that concept. But that by implication means that civil society is also aware who these people are that are causing disruption. And I think it is time that we also call on civil society, not just on the contractors who are being disrupted to go to the police, but also civil society. Which then brings me back to the beginning, and that is we have got to be united as one voice that South Africa must be a construction site. And I think at the moment that unity does not exist. It does not exist when it comes to legislation alignment. It does not exist when it comes to community involvement right from the concept of go, when we conceptualize ideas. And I think what I've taken out of this conversation is we must stop looking only at the symptomatic problems and treat this challenge holistically. I'm very encouraged by the conversation. I'm very encouraged that we've had Minister Zikalala with us for the full session. I'm very excited and very proud of the work that CASA is doing under the leadership of John Matthews and Vicky in the background and the rest of the team. Long may it continue, but I think we have just started, and I'm looking forward to how we tackle these problems now, not just symptomatically, but truly looking at the cause. Thank you, Bernadette.
Deon, thank you so much for those closing words. I must say you took most of my thunder there because you actually mentioned so many of the aspects that I jotted down just before we say thank you to everybody, to say, wow, I think the construction industry does have something to be proud of on many, many levels. But as you rightfully said, it's a complex matter. The construction itself is the final sprint, to use your words, and there's a lot that goes before it and even more that comes after it. And I think the way we take this forward in what came out of the panel discussions, and you also alluded to that, is that we need to all work on this together holistically. And I think the big message is let's not give up. There's still many opportunities. There are many things that we can do. And let's use this platform from today as a starting building block to go back to what the Honourable Minister said, that there should be a platform where we meet to discuss these issues more regularly, to seek solutions together across the board. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you to each and every one, especially the Honourable Minister of the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure for taking the time this afternoon to be with us, to give us as an industry some consolation, or not consolation, but just some hope in terms of taking this forward and making a better construction industry for all of us, not just those of us working in it, but those of us that get to use the infrastructure that is constructed. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to all the attendees. I'd also just like to remind everybody that should you wish to contact CASA, you can be in touch with the CASA convener, which is Master Builders KZN, or email info@constructionalliancesa.org.za. I see somebody has typed that into the chat, the webinar chat as well, or visit the CASA website at www.constructionalliancesa.org.za. So on that note, thank you so much to everybody, and I hand you back to Shannon from Kramer Media to wrap it up for us today. Over to you. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks so much, Bernadette. As Bernadette said, that brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all our speakers and panelists, and these include the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Honourable Sihle Zikalala, Gregory Mofokeng from the Black Business Council, John Matthews from Construction Alliance South Africa, Euan Massey from MDA Attorneys, Kile Mteto from the SA Women in Plumbing and Trades, and Deon from the Western Cape Property Development Forum. Thank you to our panel discussion facilitator, Gareth Newham from the Institute for Security Studies, and finally to our MC, Bernadette Eksteen from the South African Green Industries Council. Lastly, a grateful thank you to our sponsor, MDA Attorneys, the construction law specialists, for making this webinar possible. For more information about MDA Attorneys, please visit their website at www.mdalaw.co.za. Thank you so much to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion about construction site disruptions. And as Bernadette said, if you'd like more information about the Construction Alliance South Africa, you can email them at info@constructionalliancesa.org.za. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.